I was in the police force for 25 years. The police is full of corruption.
Why didn't you report this corruption at the time?
Officers would stitch people up all the time by lying in court.
Did you never think that this might actually catch up with you?
There were officers that had sex with prisoners in the cells.
I wanted to be a police officer. It makes me feel sick.
This man, Wayne Cousins, right? That's a dangerous man.
Do you need to have a bit of ego to be a police officer?
It's all about the ego. It's an ego-driven career. You end up with power. You end up with the power over people's liberty. You have dominion over them.
What made you want to become a police officer in the first place?
I'm a very sort of friendly, approachable person, you know, and I generally care, and I always have done.
Why are you wearing a mask today?
For my own protection. Whatever I say will be scrutinised, it will be transcribed, and they will look for any chink, legal chink in my armour to come and get me. But the public needs to know what's going on.
Could you talk a little bit about when you first started noticing corruption within the force?
Well, I didn't see corruption during my months of initial basic training. The moment you hit the street, bang, you start seeing corruption.
So what kinds of stuff did you see?
There was a lot of sexual stuff that went on. The women, some of them had a hard job. Sexual assaults on them was very commonplace. There was a tradition when a new girl joined the police, the uniform this was, that they had to station stamp her. These stamps, it had the force, the station and the date. She had to get that stamped on her arse. So they'd get hold of her, either pull down the trousers or lift up her skirt, bang.
I'm really shocked that it remains so secret, because you'd think any other world it would be like sexual harassment claim one after the other.
Yeah. There were officers that were starting relationships with prisoners. There's officers that have had sex with prisoners in the cells. There's officers that have gone round to victims of crime, you know, use their position to have sex with them. It
is sad because they're meant to be protecting these people and they're actually just abusing them.
A guy I joined with, he was actually running brothels. There was one guy who, on the way to a meeting, went to a cash machine, there was a woman begging, and he got the money out, got 20 quid out, and gave it to her for a blowjob. That's people using their position of trust for their own perverse ends, you know. These police officers were very predatory.
Could you sort of list the types of corruption that you saw regularly?
There was so much physical violence in the force. It was a war zone. Someone had been assaulted, and the officers realised that there was CCTV. It was covered, the venue was covered. They stuck it in a microwave because that would destroy the content that's on the tape.
Or does it go into evidence?
It would just go back into the CCTV controller of that venue. The other thing that you get is bearing false witness. Officers would stitch people up all the time by lying in court. But you'll just be given a book, an evidence book, about that big, and it'll be thrown at you, and you're told copy that. Just make sure your name's different.
My dad was in the police for a long time. I wanted to be a police officer. I always thought that they were wholly good. It makes me sad to kind of hear some of the things that they were doing. To me, that just seems, it just doesn't seem right.
To ask for help is seen as weakness. You become isolated from the rest of society very, very quickly. Alcohol is a major problem. Again, back then it would just smell of stale alcohol in the morning. Years ago, but cocaine was a big, big problem. There was a lot of people doing cocaine. One unit I was on, one guy was sniffing it in his locker, and they want to be like the gangsters because they see how they live and they want part of it. And this is where I started seeing organised corruption. Officers selling information to drug dealers, to organised criminals, stealing from searches.
Do you think chasing criminals and that's your job every day and focusing on what they're doing can actually kind of turn you into one?
I don't genuinely believe in the police force people start off with a corrupt mindset, and money's addictive. Once they start getting that regular income from corrupt means, it's difficult to turn it down.
Did you feel guilty witnessing some of the corruption that was going on?
When It was people that didn't deserve it. But on the whole, I didn't really get caught up with it with these big units. So I kept my nose out and left it alone. Years ago, the complaints unit were there to basically get rid of the complaint.
Or did your colleagues feel that you were above the law as police officers?
The ego gets the better of you. You could basically do what you want.
Was it something that the police force were trying to deal with?
They never dealt with it. It was swept under the carpet and it was trivialised as well. And they make a joke of it, they make light of it.
Why didn't you report this corruption at the time?
I reported corruption when it happened, but I was threatened, you know, and I lived with the threat for a while and it frightened me. So when you are a target for them, anything goes. They will send the hounds to rip you apart and they will not stop. There was no support and you would be ostracised as well. You would be a grass. They have damaged my life beyond repair. Whistleblowers within the police are a rarity.
So what kept you there?
It's a fantastic job. You know, it didn't end too well for me, but it is a fantastic job. It really, you do make a difference in people's lives, you do.
How did it make you feel when you saw the Sarah Everard case?
It was shocking to watch. There was a massive fade-in straight away. Alarm bells would have been ringing early on. There would have been an audit trail. People that worked with him, he would have had a reputation of being a bit touchy. I don't think it was any surprise to those that really knew him that he did cross that line. This guy, days prior, had twice been caught flashing, and that was the one thing. The moment I saw that, I remember ringing up an ex-colleague and saying, this man is a murderer. This should have profiled this guy, without a doubt.
Would you say that the majority of corruption is the force's fault?
I think the employer needs to understand that when people go into this world, they're going to change, and it might not be for the good, and they need to address that and stop putting it down to personal liability. When there is corruption, it should be the institution is to blame.
It's kind of got to the stage where even my nan is sort of questioning, you know, she doesn't trust the Metropolitan Police, and if it's getting to the stage where my nan's not trusting, I mean, it's understandable why I wouldn't trust the police. And really, until these root causes are addressed, you're only ever going to be fighting a losing battle.
I think the police have totally lost their way. I'm seeing things in the press and thinking, oh, this is crazy, what they're doing. Most of the officers I've dealt with aren't corrupt. They're good people. They are good people. They are misguided. My problem is with these rotten apples that are in there and how they are protected, and they are.
During my time in the Met, I worked with murderers, rapists and paedophiles. I left the police because I couldn't be part of the force anymore. There was a senior officer, he was later convicted for a double murder.
What?
Were you really not aware? Did you genuinely have no idea? So isn't it?
I remember one officer went to a suicide. It was someone who hanged themselves and they took a selfie.
Are you joking? Oh my goodness.
Were you ever offered anything like drink or drugs or anything like that by other officers?
It's hard for me to trust the police, the biggest thing being a woman of colour.
Do you think that police can be salvaged? When you said racists, rapists, murderers, paedophiles, you don't mean the prisoners or people who get arrested, you mean the policemen themselves?
Yes, I mean other police officers.
Wow.
Were you an officer? What was your role within the Met?
I had various roles. I was a uniformed police officer, I was a detective. I was in the Met Police for over a decade. I left the police around 5 years ago.
What made you want to become an officer?
I think it's going to sound quite cliched, but as a very young person, I genuinely wanted to help. I think people who join now probably go into it a lot more with their eyes open.
Was there anybody at the time that you suspected of corruption or even illegal activity?
What I always found, and this doesn't surprise me, is that the people who went on to commit murder, who were later caught in possession of child pornography, who later went on to and probably were committing sexual offences at the time when I knew them, I don't think anyone suspected anything. I was at the police station at the same time as David Carrick. There was never any gossip or rumours or anything to suggest what sexual offences he was committing outside of work.
How does it make you feel knowing that you've worked in the same spaces and been around people that are capable of that when they're supposed to have a duty of care for the public?
makes you think that surely someone knew something, someone who worked with him closely would have been aware of some of those behaviours or comments that he made. No one is that good at hiding the large part of themselves. There was a senior officer who was always very good to me. He was later convicted for a double murder.
What?
As someone who became a detective, not being able to identify those people is quite scary.
Were you really not aware? Did you genuinely have no idea?
I guess the point is that you don't know what anyone's capable of.
Yeah, completely.
Which is fair.
What sort of wrongdoings did you observe?
I remember one officer telling me that they went to a suicide. It was someone who hanged themselves and they took a selfie.
Are you joking? Oh my goodness. What was the kind of corruption that you were seeing?
When I say corruption, I think mostly incompetence.
Okay.
And sometimes willful incompetence. It's much more evidence has been misplaced because it's put in a storage room that's just a complete shambles.
Right.
Things get lost and got lost.
Were there any cases where you saw police officers tamper with the evidence?
There was a team of detectives known as a crime squad who would deal with things like drug issues in the area, robberies, burglaries, things like that. A lot of them had been arrested because they'd been conducting searches at people's houses and then keeping or using some of the items that have been seized from that, not storing it in evidence correctly.
What sort of items were they?
Electronic items, cars, things like that.
So innit? Oh, I didn't think I could.
Sorry, it's just, yeah, that's crazy.
Were you ever offered anything like drink or drugs or anything like that by other officers?
On duty?
Yeah.
Not drugs, no. There was an example of a culture when I was a young detective where you'd have what was called office lunches that were essentially boozy celebrations with food at some point. But they'd start in the day,
But would you still be on duty?
They'd start technically, yes, on duty, yeah. I would say there are people who turn up for work intoxicated.
Yeah.
And have done, and I've smelled alcohol on people, whether that's because they had a drink problem or whether that's just because they went out the night before, but they would then be driving police cars. I remember a female officer making a complaint that a senior male officer had inappropriately touched her, put her hand up under her skirt. A senior female officer then took her aside and persuaded her not to make any allegation, as it wouldn't be good.
Senior female officer.
As it wouldn't be good for her career.
Did I hear that right?
Yeah, it's the female part. It's like how are women not supporting other women?
Am I hearing this right? Are you serious?
Yeah.
I'd expect it from a male officer, no offence, but not a female.
No, I would actually. Because
Really?
I think it's harder for females in the police, so you kind of, you
where's
have
the
to do what
support?
you gotta do. I think that's wrong, but I think she has been groomed by the culture.
What was your superintendents doing? What was your sergeants? The hierarchy, like how were they handling you officers?
Well, again, I mean, when I was a very young police officer, you'd get sent out on your own in the morning and you were told not to come back until you'd either got 5 tickets for someone not wearing a seatbelt or you've stopped and searched 5 people and
Wow.
don't come back until you've done that. There will be a cash prize or a gift voucher every month given to the police officer with the most arrests or most tickets.
It's just
Crazy.
so wrong, isn't it? It's almost like you're not trying to protect, it's almost like you're actively seeking people
It's like
to
a sales role.
arrest.
It's sounding like a sales role, like you're being
Yeah.
incentivized.
Yeah.
Do you trust the police now, and can we trust them more as civilians?
Yes, you can trust the police or you can trust police officers, but you should always take some personal responsibility and make sure you're safe. And if someone did say they were a police officer, if you don't need to get in the car with them, don't get in the car with them. If you need to go somewhere with police officers, even if they're in uniform, make sure someone knows where you're going and when you'll be back. So it's all about reducing the risk to yourself.
Can you give me an example of some of the racism that you saw throughout your time at the Met?
It would be more kind of stereotyping and
But in what sense?
comments.
Like, give me an example.
Let's stop them, they're up to no good, when they're obviously not doing anything, they're just standing there talking.
Okay, and most of the time would you say that these situations tended to happen towards black boys?
I mean, statistically speaking, young black males get stopped and searched more often than
Yeah.
any other group, so Yeah.
What's your opinion on that?
It's a difficult one. If you're looking at it from a purely statistical perspective, then young black males are known to carry weapons more than some other groups. My issue with it is that the police aren't looking at why that might be the case and the socio-economic situation that they're in.
Do you not think that it's quite a bold thing to say that statistically young black males are the ones to carry lives more, because that data is being provided by an institution that's already notoriously racist?
I see what you're trying to say. I don't think I have the answer.
Why didn't you report more of the bad behaviours?
I think as a young police officer who is working alongside older, more experienced people, you do feel like your opinion isn't as valued and you're not going to be heard, and that there's only going to be negative repercussions for you and your career if you ever spoke out against something.
Was there anything at all to sort of check your mental state or anything like that before joining?
I went through a higher standard of vetting when I went to a specialist unit, but that was much more focused on whether you'd be vulnerable to being blackmailed. I think what has happened in the last few years, the Wayne Couzens and the David Garricks of this world, I think that has emphasised even more that vetting needs to include personality tests and psychometric tests that evaluate people's opinions on things like race and gender.
Do you think that's something that is going to happen?
I don't know. I hope it does.
What was the dynamics like in the workplace environment?
The first thing that comes to mind was stressful. There was always that overriding sense of not being able to investigate crimes as effectively as you should be doing because you haven't got the time or the resources. I think any police officer will tell you they never feel like they're truly off duty. You have a responsibility, you have a duty of care towards members of the public. It can create a lot of tension, a lot of stress and a lot of emotional trauma.
If you do something that's really like traumatic or just obviously like horrific, that psychological help, is that something that is offered more so?
When I was very young, I went to an extremely stressful situation that I wasn't really offered any support or counselling, and to this day, it kind of still affects me.
Yeah.
It was a cot death. I think I'd been in the police for about 3 months and I had to examine the baby for any wounds or any suspicious marks and then stay with the baby until he was assessed by a doctor. The only thing that was kind of said to me by a sergeant on one occasion immediately afterwards, do you want to talk to me about it? And at the time, as a young officer, I thought I needed to be brave and tough. And I said, no, thank you. And nothing more was ever said about it.
Which is horrific, because how can you get on and do jobs like that? It makes you think that you can make people more cynical and more, do you know what I mean? You almost feel like you're building these characters and these like psyches for people to almost become the worst version of themselves because there's no help.
And that's a big part of why I think the police needs such a thorough review, in the sense of, you're right, they do become cynical, it does become dark because all you're dealing with day in, day out are horrific things.
Is there anything you're particularly proud of from your time in the police?
I don't think, I know I made my parents proud by joining. I can't think of a moment that I feel proud of because...
Oh, that's sad.
Well, I mean, remember what you're doing. If you're arresting someone, you're taking away their freedom. Whether they deserve it or not, that's not actually for you to decide. You make a decision, you do that, you follow the evidence. A good result for a detective is you win a case at court and that person goes to jail. Well, that doesn't make me feel proud.
Yeah.
It doesn't, even if you've saved someone's life or prevented them from being raped or murdered.
I'm glad I was able to do that, but often that doesn't help the victim.
Do you think that police can be salvaged? Or is it something that you think needs to be dismantled and rebuilt?
I think it can be salvaged, but it would have to be restructured a hell of a lot. Additional resources, the right resources and the right people in place to enact them. The right training, the right support, and the right people being given the opportunities as well. I just don't think they're anywhere near being what they need to be.
As someone that was scared and in a situation where I needed the police, I now have quite a positive personal experience with it. but I don't think that anything can discredit some of the bad things that have happened.
I completely agree. It's the type of job that you can't just have a few bad apples and that's okay. That's not good enough.
The Black Lives Matter movement, that has taught me that a lot of people can't trust the police. So even if I can trust the police, if my black friends can't trust the police, then what does it really matter that I can? It still doesn't really fill me with confidence.
It's interesting because I want to be able to trust the police, because I agree with Holly, and I think, you know, the majority do an amazing job. We would be in anarchy without them. But it's hard for me to trust the police, and obviously the biggest thing being a woman of colour, a black woman at that. The damage has already been done, so it would take a lot of time and change and development.
Upon reflection, do you have any regrets?
I'm glad I joined the police and I'm glad I left the police. It's a period of my life that, whilst I might not be proud of, it's taught me a lot.
Do you think you'd be able to speak as openly about this without the mask?
Certain aspects not as comfortable with when we're talking about specific people I may have worked with or stories that I may have told, but the general discussion about what I think would make the police better, I'm certainly not the only one saying that.
So what do you guys think of that?
Interesting.
I found it refreshing that you got to actually hear the perspective of a police officer.
I think it's good that he was open about like his experiences.
I definitely think that he's sort of being, you know, he's being held accountable for it, you know. He's not trying to just sort of brush it under the carpet and say, you know what, this actually isn't okay and that's why I left. So I have a lot more respect for that.
I smuggled drugs and alcohol into prison. I've never seen so much drugs. You could go to prison and not take drugs and come out a full-blown crackhead.
It's just actually disgusting to hear that.
Prison is full of corruption. It was known that drugs was being smuggled in food and then it's swallowed down in condoms. The guards wouldn't do nothing about it. When I was about 12, I started selling cannabis within my school. After a while, I started linking with people on the estate. I realised that there was a market in my area to move up the scale. So I was a drugs runner, county lines runner. I was going in and around England, dropping off bigger packages of crack and heroin.
What was most appealing to you with selling drugs?
I didn't want market trainers no more. I didn't want £30 trainers. That was just it. Whatever I wanted, I can have it. From the drugs on, I could make anything up to like £1,000 in a day. So I was selling drugs 24 hours around the clock, 7 days a week. The morning that I got called, as I stepped off the train, 3 police officers have approached.
How long did you get?
I got 4 years. I was incarcerated for the misuse of drugs, crack, heroin, so Class A and Class B, and I even got down with the cannabis as well.
And that's your first?
That was my first prison sentence, yeah.
Were you scared?
The first day when I got into prison, this officer's rattled the keys, she's opened the door, and I've looked in, got a sack over my shoulder. The woman's opened the door, and it's like a cave, it's black. I can just see this pale face beaming from the bed. The tear just ran down my eye, just went on the floor. I said my first 3 days, you didn't hear me say nothing.
Living with these people, so to speak, in an enclosed space. What sort of things did you see?
There was an inmate who was seen as top dog. The reason I say top dog is because this woman ran the functioning of the prison. So I was doing landscaping, and the officer that was in charge of landscaping, I would realise that every day we would go to check in, get our equipment and get our tasks for the day. The prison officer wouldn't be the person who managed that. It would be this woman, top dog, who will tell us, we're over here today. If there's ever a problem, that top dog will deal with the issue. Anything that you wanted to do, you would communicate through her first. She had the overall say. Say jump, he would say how high. That's how it was. She's caused standoffs for days, caused other people to be harmed. the running of how narcotics come into the prison. The prison officer, he didn't say much. He used to get taken advantage of, spoken to disrespectfully, put down, undermined. He turned a blind eye to something that he knew wouldn't be able to fix. This prison officer knows the repercussions or the outcome of rebelling against this person. Women can turn the prison upside down on the sale of this one woman. The prison is full of drugs. It was crack, heroin. I've never seen so much drugs in an institutional establishment. I've come to the worst place to try and reform because drugs is all over this place. You could go to prison and not take drugs and come out a full-blown crackhead.
So you'd say in the prison that you was detained at, there was a lack of duty of care towards, drug reform or the well-being of the inmates.
And the reason I say that as well, the guards would see people throwing things over the fence all the time and they wouldn't do nothing about it. The workers don't always go to prison to be the best person or the most empowering person to the inmate. It's a job, it pays the bills. When you're on visits, the visiting hall that drugs was being smuggled in, it didn't have cameras. It was known that drugs was being smuggled in through cups of tea and drank, and then it's swallowed down in condoms. The prisoners, they come back to the cell and they're galloning down litres of water. They start jumping, everyone is jumping. It regurgitates the stomach and all the drugs start rolling out.
It's worrying that, head people in charge within the prison system are allowing this to continue, knowing of how it affects everyone involved.
Nobody doesn't want to intercept it because it's more harm than good, isn't it? It's a lucrative business, a lucrative income. It could be a side hustle for some of the prison officers. Eventually kind of got the ropes of how prison worked. I started getting involved with smuggling drugs into the prison.
Could you give an example?
I got wind that there was stuff being thrown over in tennis balls. There's about 3 other girls that were trying to obtain the tennis ball once it had been thrown over the fence. I'd happened to see one of the girls that morning. I would say to the girl, run. And she would run and get the tennis ball. We would do that every day. When you're enhanced prisoner, you can go back into the block with anything that's found in the outside space. Top Dog was aware that this was happening, but when the drugs was coming back in, it would go to her to then be distributed out within the prison to the other prisoners. I made it very clear to everybody in there, I don't take this stuff, I sell it. New Year's, myself and my friend, we hatched a plan, smuggling some alcohol. I built a very good relationship with one of the inmates' mum. Top Dog got wind. That morning we was in the gardens doing the landscaping. She's coming over to us and said, we've heard your plan, so let's go halves. So her mum threw over a litre of vodka in a clear water bottle, and by the end of our shift, she said, yeah, I got it. We've gone back to the block, she's knocked our door, gave us our half of vodka, just like that. It was funny because we were steaming, we were drunk. And the officer the next morning said, yeah, we know what you lot got up to. We know about the vodka. Yet again, a blind eye got turned.
It's just actually disgusting to hear that. Where is the reform? That's ridiculous.
If some officers are not thinking in the way of reform, how can the system reform these people if the people working there don't even believe in reform?
Do you think prisons will ever change the way they are?
No. I think the thinking of the people leading prisons need to change.
It's heartbreaking, to be honest.
What would you say to the younger you that just desired the trainers at a time?
Boy, I shouldn't have given up on myself when I did. I shouldn't have given up on myself when I did because I had a lot of promising opportunities ahead of me, but I wouldn't change it because this road's been a lot more colourful and the journey's been very bumpy. So, it's nice to be on the straight one now, isn't it?